don't expect anything to come of. We all know that Creepy Joe is Creepy Joe. I don't expect anything to come of this. It says 2014, really not that long ago.
I would say already Howard Dean's already taken Jesuit Joe's side.
Oh, what a surprise! Hey, what religion is Howard Dean? Wasn't he? Didn't he used to be the Demon Rat party chair?
I believe I believe he's Episcopalian, but we've talked about that, which is, as we've said before, has traditionally been the American version of the Anglican Church. Now, by the way, I need to make.
I'm pretty sure I've got Jesuit breadcrumbs on Howard Dean, George. But go ahead, I'll look them up.
Okay, and just for clarification, back it was at 2005 or so roughly 15 years ago, there was a creation of the American Anglican Church. There's supposed to be, which is comprised of disgruntled Episcopalians. And however, because the American Anglican Church is supposed to be a little bit more conservative than regular Episcopalians. But I really haven't looked into them because I've been busy looking into so many other things. But they're probably just controlled opposition also.
Yeah, Episcopalian. You said Episcopalian America versus who else?
Well, back in the early 20th century, you had the creation of the American Anglican Church.
Okay.
They're supposed to be way more conservative than your regular Episcopals on when it comes to issues like homosexuality, abortion, and so forth. But they're probably just as controlled as the mainstream Episcopalians.
Yeah, we'd spoken yesterday about the attack and or breaking up of Protestant Christianity with an onslaught, an incessant onslaught of needless sects. And if ever there was a useless sect, it's the American version of the Church of England. Are you kidding me? What a joke. Tommy, good to see you. Yo, baby. You agree, George?
Yes. So, anyhow, because for decades, most of your mainstream Protestant churches, especially the Episcopalians and Methodists and so forth, have been sliding way towards the left. Not just in terms of, say, their doctrines and their behavior, but their politics, their actual politics, because they're, generally speaking, this is just my opinion, generally speaking, people who tend to be theologically liberal tend to be politically liberal also.
Well, and this brings us back to the Catholic Church and the fact that just how important the militant's job is, because the Catholic Church has always been far left. It created communism. It lives off of the blood of babies. The Catholic Church has the power to end abortion instantly. And it's amazing that it is able to continue to fleece the Latin Mass conservatard Catholics on the idea that the church is passionately pro-life. Absolutely absurd. Absolutely ridiculous.
Okay, if I could just make a clarification, Johnny. In that you said, yes, we've already established that it was Rome that created communism roughly 40 years ago in South America. However, I'm of the opinion that most Catholics and even non-Catholics don't know that. They believe the church official position on communism is not favorable.
George, absolutely. That's my point, brother. That's my point. It upsets me that the church has been so successful on these alternate realities, being at enmity with Freemasonry, being pro-life, being anti-communist. They're all extremely successful psychological operations. We know that because we're informed and we found that information, how based on the writings of Thomas Aquinas and the practices of the Jesuits, first in the reductionist communes in South America in the 1700s, and then feeding Jesuit-trained puppet papal court Jew Karl Marx the tenets of communism in his British Museum closet that he was in. Yeah, obviously, it's two totally different things, George. What we know, who are informed, and what everybody else believes, the lies everybody else believes.
Well, I have to say, I think this, because the idea of communism in terms of, to me, there's a similarity to cattle herding. Like, you're herding the citizens as cattle, and the state, assumes totalitarian authority, just like how like cattle on a farm have no rights, for instance. But going back to cattle herding, that's the Jesuits who invented that. Which is I still eat meat every now and then, so I'm not going to condone people for doing it. But it's undeniable that the cattle herding industry is very immoral. If you see the footage of what's going on, and there's a similarity to communism, herding the citizens to cattle being herded onto the farms. And there's the Jesuit Eusebio Kino, SJ, who now has a statue at the United States Congress representing Arizona in the Hall of Statues. But that goes back to the Jesuits too, just like, and we mentioned Fidel Castro, one of the biggest communists of the 20th century, was openly educated by Jesuits.
Triple dipped. Castro was triple dipped by the Jesuits. And then that's another bullshit subterfuge, Eric, that communism is vehemently anti the KKK. They sport the Maltese cross as their icon. They're vehemently anti-Catholic. Communists are vehemently anti-Catholic. All amazingly successful psyops.
Well, yes, exactly. And of course, Eric was just talking about the cattle industry and how they, on their communes. Okay. Oh, what?
George, what are you taking, a delivery? Come on, stay with us here.
Well, it looks like he has to go there for a second. But I'm going to link the post I did on Eusebio Kino. And it's actually admitted in the, going right to the Catholics admit this right on their new Advent Encyclopedia. This is on the article on the Paraguayan reductions. It says here that the economic basis was a sort of communism, which, however, differed materially from the modern system, which bears the same name and was essentially theocratic. And then we have a quote here, quote, the Jesuits, writes Gelpi Pharaoh, quote, realized in their Christian commonwealth that all is good and nothing is bad in the plans of modern socialists and communists.
Saucy has a lot to say about Kino, doesn't he?
Yeah, he called him the, I have the quote from Saucy. I linked the my post I did on here, but I believe I do quote Saucy in this article. Yeah, he wrote, Rulers of Evil, page 93, the American cinema's earliest subject matter to capture the popular imagination, the cowboy, was a Jesuit contribution as well. Eusebio Kino, whose statue is one of two representing Arizona in the U.S. Capitol building, was a Jesuit professor from Ingolstadt College in Bavaria. Between 1687 and 1711, Kino introduced cattle and their management to southern Arizona. For this, he is gratefully remembered as the father of the cattle business. Pondering the works of Kircher and Kino, that's Jesuit Anastasius Kircher, the inventor of germ theory and modern projectors, we come to a rather astonishing awareness. Kino's cowboys, as projected through Kircher's magic lantern, indoctrinated America's earliest movie audiences with the underlying message of Jesuit theater and Roman Catholic theology. And then Saucy says that knowing and obeying Scripture is not necessary in comprehending the ways of good and evil or in doing justice under natural law.
Yeah, that is one of the most powerful things Saucy has written. That was a real eye-opening aha moment for me. Because think of, if we had to guess, how much of the entertainment industry has been built on the cowboy genre? I would say, good grief, almost as much as space If you divide up the lies of movies, a massive portion is Westerns, a massive portion is war propaganda, and a massive portion is space, all critical to the Roman agenda. And Saucy's proclaiming that an important part of the Western genre is this myth that you can have men of ethics and morality without any spiritual need. Saucy specifically says without any need for the Bible to guide them in why would they and I'm telling you, Rome Flicks, I'm pointing to my television in my bat cave here. Rome Flicks loves Westerns. Rome Flicks is pushing the Wyatt Earp. George, I hope you're still listening. Rome Flicks has pulled up 1960 something Dirty Dozen, a really well done movie with Lee Marvin. And I'm rewatching it, and it's clear that one of the reasons why Dirty Dozen is important to Rome Flicks is the character of Telly Savalas being an absolute ass, pretending to be a Protestant evangelical psycho who ruins the whole mission and puts them all at risk.
Well, and of course, you're talking about the 1967 film, as you said, with an all-star cast. You had Telly Savalas, Lee Marvin, as you said, Donald Sutherland,
Italian Catholic Nick Cassavetes, Vietnam War dissenter. Is he not Catholic? Go ahead.
Well, he was actually Greek. However, he atoned for it by sending his son to Notre Dame High School.
Interesting.
You had the recently retired Jim Brown, who was probably one of the greatest running backs in the history of. Well, it wasn't the NFL. I believe he played in the AFL or whatever league he was, and he was only about 30 years old when he retired. But you also had Donald Sutherland, Charles Bronson, George Kennedy, Ernest Borgnine, Robert Ryan, and you also had Richard Yeckel, who played the sergeant. And if you think about it,
go ahead, finish. Go ahead.
Okay, so anyhow, it was about this ostensibly suicide mission comprised of 12 convicted men, hence the name The Dirty Dozen, who are either going to be hanged or receive long prison sentences. And they were supposed to attack this chateau near Normandy just before the D-Day invasion. So you have a psyop within a psyop within a psyop. So they justified murdering these German officers and their wives.
Just really quick, just speaking on D-Day, I don't know if we mentioned this. I saw this on, I was watching, when I was at my parents' house, there's a new Rome Flick show on World War II. I don't know if you've seen that on there, Johnny. I think it came up just a few weeks ago. It's just the first season. But they had an episode on D-Day, and they played the quote from Eisenhower. But Eisenhower said, and I'm going to link this, it's from AmericanRhetoric.com, but he said, soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade towards which we have striven these many months. That's how he introduced his speech to the soldiers before the D-Day invasion.
We've covered several times how Eisenhower really should have been court-martialed. I guess the only authority to do that would be adulterous Freemason stricken by syphilis Franklin Roosevelt. Court-martialed for sending America's young men into the meat grinder of Erwin Rommel's Dragon's Teeth, completely unnecessary at Normandy. Absolute needless meat grinder of death and destruction. But it was all on purpose. Eisenhower, which we have mentioned previously, without a single leadership job through his entire career, one of the most least qualified men anywhere of any military to be the Supreme Allied Commander, an absolute incompetent piece of shit who coached football at was it St. Mary's in Texas?
Yes, San Antonio. So, are you saying Ike was as qualified to be the Supreme Allied Commander as Hillary was to be Senator from New York?
Well done, George. Most people don't realize that Hillary had absolutely no connection to the state of New York, with the exception of her husband being the bastard child of a pervert deviant Rockefeller from New York. So it gave them great pleasure to bring her back to New York.
There again, are you saying he was as qualified as Justin Trudeau Castro to be the Prime Minister of Canada?
Yes, Justin Trudeau Castro. Yes, agreed. Well, that's not entirely true, George. Justin Trudeau Castro did have some leadership opportunities when he was assaulting, raping, and abusing young girls at that high school where he was teaching. But yeah, other than that, he did not have very much on his resume.
So are you saying that? So are you saying that he was about as qualified as Donald John Trump to be president of the United States?
Well, you know, Donald John Trump has had a lot of practice saying "you're fired," as well as being a pervert, deviant pedophile who regularly had sex, maybe still does, with his own daughter. Yeah, I guess so. And don't forget,
his daddy took him to the Al Smith dinners when he was a boy.
He was very familiar with the Al Smith dinners, where your job is for all the traitor puppets, the Catholic assets in Romerica, to make the Pope of America, that is the Archbishop of New York, laugh, which is one of the most important things you can do as an American politician.
Oh, okay. So, anyhow, but I know I mentioned this before. I probably brought this up 2 years ago. But just getting back to D-Day, the Allied invasion of Normandy, one of the officers who was on the planning committee was Alfred Vadermeyer, and he, as I said, he went to Creation Prep in Omaha, Nebraska. So he was. So I'm not sure. When they were working out the details for the invasion, he was probably suggesting, "Hey, General," you know, when he was talking to Eisenhower, you know, "Hey, General, maybe we should put all these Protestant troops in front of these machine guns to maximize their debt."
Yeah, let's.
You know, that was Robert Badermeyer.
I'm sorry, Alfred Vader.
Alfred Badermeyer, yeah, and he went to Jesuit Creighton Prep. And you know,
Yes.
I know Eisenhower. I put his White House advisor when he was president was a Jesuit-trained Knight of Malta, Bernard Michael Shanley. But I know one of his military advisors at the time during World War II was also Robert D. Murphy, who was educated by the Jesuits at Marquette. He probably had something to do with all the Protestant soldiers being slaughtered at Normandy. And I thought it was really interesting that the Rome's like just in the documentary they didn't highlight like the historical significance of the Crusades and like why Eisenhower would use the term. Why would he use the term crusade when addressing the soldiers before going into D-Day?
This reminds me of how Eisenhower absolutely shat himself, gushed all over himself as president, and officially recognized the role of one of the biggest Luciferian traitors to Western civilization, Edmund Walsh, upon his death, writing an official presidential letter to Georgetown.
Well, and of course, you had to. So, I brought this up last year, back in, I guess, February of last year. So, just over a year ago, when Donald Trump was giving his second State of the Union address, he specifically talked about the Allied invasion of Normandy because last year was the 75th anniversary. And there are something like 3 or 4 survivors in the audience. I guess they're probably all 90 plus. And he specifically referenced the Eisenhower quote. He talked about the launch of the Great Crusade into Europe. And I imagine most of the people listening and watching in the audience there or on the radio or whatever didn't completely miss that, the significance of that. The people don't realize this, even though it has attained a secular usage. Crusade is a Catholic term. It is a religious invasion. It is basically the Catholic version of jihad.
And George, what most people don't realize is that the basis for the Crusades was to slaughter Christians in Europe. They have been relabeled as Christians attacking infidels in the Holy Land, but that is only a small portion of their purpose. Their real purpose is to slaughter heretics anywhere, and the top targets have always been Christians.
Yes, well, true Bible-believing Christians. You could say Protestants or proto-Protestants with the Albigensians and Waldensians and so forth, but which brings up to the topic du jour of of the last several weeks is this whole what do you want to call it? COVID-19, Corona 19, the Wuhan virus, the Kung Flu virus, the Chinese virus, and people. There's all sorts of debates as to what it should be called. Why not just call it the Vatican virus?
Yeah, I could also call it the what is that? I'm looking at Eric's screen. Coronavirus outbreak. Trudeau announces new measures. Fuck you. Yeah, I can't believe how USA Today blew up the worst of the traitorous Catholic puppets, starting with that piece of shit in New York, saying what a wonderful job they're doing. George, I prefer Kung Flu Plandemic. I think that's a good combination.
Well, basically, they have Cuomo up all the time. He's basically kind of like now like the new coronavirus like emperor.
Yeah, it'd be good way to put it. The coronavirus emperor, that good friend of Jeffrey Epstein that made frequent trips on the Lolita Express to Rape Island, to Orgy Island. That guy is about as corrupt and controlled as possible. That's why he is grabbing every possible opportunity to destroy freedom for the poor bastards of New York. I'm so glad I don't live there anymore.
So, I'm sorry, are you talking about
oh, sorry, what were you saying, George?
Johnny, are you talking about Cuomo or are you talking about Gavin Newsom?
Yeah, you know what, George? The bookends, the Roman Catholic communist bookends of the People's Republic of New York or the People's Republic of Mexipornia. It's such a shame because upstate New York is beautiful. I lived in upstate New York. It really, the Finger Lakes and wine country, absolutely wonderful place to live, ruined, destroyed, just like Colorado, just like California. Some really beautiful places in California, absolutely ruined.
Well, I didn't tell you this, but I was actually born in Plattsburgh, New York.
Oh, I'm glad you didn't tell me that.
Why is that?
I'm completely teasing you. Eric, what were you trying to say?
Yeah.
Hang on, George. Eric, what were you trying to jump in on?
Well, actually, to George's point, Gavin Newsom, that he went to Jesuit Santa Clara, and both supposedly Newsom and Cuomo were big enemies of Donald Trump before this coronavirus scandal, and now Trump is just giving both of them, tremendous praise whenever he can, which I think is very telling. And I was just going to say, actually, and I have in this video I had up here, this I linked this in the chat. This is just because after the war was over, the Pope Pius XII blessed the Allied troops in Rome, and he actually praised the Roman Catholic Arch Inquisitor Sir Thomas More here to the Allied soldiers. And then just because it ties into what Eisenhower said about launching a crusade. That's really what World War II was. It was an inquisition conducted from both sides. And I said I linked the book, and I recommend people should read the book Hitler's Pope by a Catholic author, John Cornwell. And then that there's many other books and documentation that shows it, but just reading that book, you'll see that the Vatican was backing the Nazis as well. They're controlling both sides.
The very title is a psyop. Adolf Hitler was the biggest pawn and puppet of Jesuits, Nazi Jesuits, Gestapo Jesuit Himmler, and Pacelli. Pacelli had his hands dirty from the beginning, back in the 20s and 30s when he was the nuncio to Austria and Germany at the critical years for the foundation of the Nazi Party, and which would never have gotten off the ground if it weren't bankrolled by devout Catholic Franz von Papen, aristocrats. I guess back then he was a millionaire, Franz von Papen. And everything you need to know about how needless World War II was can be found in Edmund Walsh, S.J., and his superior general, Vladimir Ledakowski, there in Russia, both of them personally responsible for the creation of the Third Reich and the so-called October Revolution, the both sides of World War II, the fascists and the communists, into the Cold War.
Well said. I do think that the title of that book should have been Pacelli's Fuhrer.
Yeah. Well, look, he's a Catholic. He's not gonna give a true title. We covered yesterday this revelation. I have Rome Flix is one of their favorite actors, Roman Catholic Pierce Brosnan, that blew up his Bond appearances, and the I don't know what year it is. The movie GoldenEye has the balls to highlight the British betrayal of the Cossacks at the end of World War II. How Britain sent the Cossacks back to Stalin to be tortured and slaughtered so that Britain could ensure the continued growth of communism and the Cold War.
Eisenhower did something similar. I think it was called Operation Keyhole, where they sent German prisoners. Like when the Russians started marching into Berlin, they sent all the German prisoners of war back into Russia.
And those German prisoners that survived were sent to the Rhine Meadow death camps, where they wasted away from disease and malnutrition and died by the millions. Eisenhower should have been executed for that just by itself. But instead, everybody blows him and blows him up, and he became president because he was, again, one of the least qualified clowns to get to that to get to that height.
And another thing too, I just think you mentioned Edmund Walsh, because there's lots of evidence too that what happened at Nagasaki wasn't like an airborne drop nuclear bomb. Could have been detonated on the ground, or it could have been like a magnesium flash device. Because I have the footage on my channel. There was a Jesuit novitiate with only 4 miles away from the blast, and all the Jesuits inside survived. Which kind of which I think defies the laws of physics. But Edmund Walsh, the Jesuit priest, master geopolitical strategist, in his book Total Empire, he said that it was morally justifiable for the United States to drop the atomic bomb.
Yeah, Edmund Walsh.
No one he got no media criticism or no backlash for saying that. The thought of a supposed priest saying that it's okay to drop an atomic bomb, I think is horrifying.
Edmund Walsh was instrumental in the creation of Soviet Russia, and yet he turned around and was the puppet behind corrupt drunkard joke Joe McCarthy and their psyop to give cover to the fact that the Soviet Union had completely inundated leftist United States government offices with communist agents. And so cover with blown cover is cover. That's exactly what the McCarthy circus was, led by Edmund Walsh, the great communist fighter who helped create communism in Russia. Blown cover is cover. And after all that outrage died down, in the same way that the Jesuit suppression and the gunpowder plot aided the Jesuits, the communists had even bigger, more free reign in American government.
Johnny, could I just, I know you're talking about Edmund Walsh, but something I just wanted to mention. Yesterday we were talking about all the egregious things that are going on across the world, particularly the United States, and specifically Los Angeles and Los Angeles County. We're discussing the sheriff of LA County, Alex Villanueva, how he's using this as a pretext to shut down gun shops. Well, not only that, but something people may not be aware of is I'm not sure whether this is LA proper or LA County. It could be both. There are roughly 10 million residents in that county, which makes it the largest county in America. It's roughly the same size of New York City. So about 3% of the US population lives in that jurisdiction. So what they've started doing there to businesses that will not comply with the shutdown order, I quote, non-essential businesses, end quote, is they're resorting to turning off the power and the water if they will not comply with the shutdown order.
Just as powerful as kicking their doors in at 3 a.m., George. And let's remind the audience that we found that Alex Villanueva is a massively corrupt Roman Catholic who should never, as soon as he got in, he fired everyone at the top and rehired at least 2 fired corrupt sheriffs who should not have just been fired. Those pieces of shit should be in orange jumpsuits. But that's how you get away. When you're a cop and you commit a crime, you're almost never punished as a citizen for that crime. And 9 times out of 10, the citizens pay off the victims of your crime. I don't understand how they continue to get away with that. When a cop commits a crime, the puppet lawyer ambulance chasing scum sue the government and the citizens pay for the cop's crime. It's absolutely amazing how that they continue to work that.
Well, it's funny. I sent this out like 2 years ago. There was an article in my local rag, the Santa Rosa the Santa Rosa Press Democrat, about how for decades the Sonoma County Sheriff's Department had been providing security at Bohemian Grove, but I guess it's leaked, and so they had a year or two ago they had to put the kibosh on that. So they're now resorting to private security there. So.
Yeah, not a surprise. And let me also mention this as Eric continues to post stuff related to the massive war crimes of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that I'm thankful to your best friend forever, Brother White Power Phelps, because he's the one that put me onto this insane idea that, unfortunately, makes total sense, that it was a complete psychological operation to have the American people take responsibility for this unbelievable war crime of punishment of Japan for kicking the Jesuits out in the 1600s. And as proof of that, one of the top Jesuits leading this outrage was Pedro Urupe, who was rewarded for his mass murder of Japanese to become the superior general a couple of decades later.
So you notice a pattern here. I know we've discussed this before. Okay, Jerry Ford was on the Warren Commission. He was gifted several things. He got to become Speaker of the House, Vice President, and President. So he got the trifecta. You have a couple of future Supreme Court justices.
Hey, don't forget. Excellent point. Don't forget, it was Jerry Ford who made George Herbert Walker, pedophile Bush Skull and Bones 41, director of the Catholic Intelligence Agency too, George. That's another reward.
Okay, yes. Okay, so you had a couple of Supreme Court justices during the final phase of the Second 30 Years' War, a.k.a. World War II. John Paul Stevens and Weezer White, or whatever his name. Okay, one was in charge of blowing up, I get these confused. One was in charge of blowing up Jack Kennedy, making him a superhero for the PT-109 fiasco. And the other one was responsible for shooting down Yamamoto.
Yeah, another series, another bit of information that Brother White Power is excellent on, explaining how the top leaders, the top generals of World War II that were very good, had a high probability of ending the conflict early, were all murdered, executed, because that's not what Rome wanted. Rome did not want the conflict to end. Rome wanted the bloodshed, the collateral damage, the monstrosities to continue as long as possible. That's why Eisenhower repeatedly reined in Patton, cut off his fuel, diverted it to the incompetent British and boy buggerer Bernard Law Montgomery.
Oh, Montgomery, I know he got an audience with Pius XII.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic.
Eisenhower. And Eisenhower, I just know in his book, he titled his book, what was his memoir book, World War II memoir? I think it was called Crusade into Europe, was like the title of the book. I know in that book, he says that his top priority was to protect the Vatican at all costs when the Allies were moving into Rome. And I linked the source, and just you mentioned, Johnny, just how the Vatican backstabbed the Japanese with the murder at Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Before this backstabbing, though, the Vatican was very, very behind the Japanese fascist imperial army in the rise of the Japanese empire. And I linked that in an article from the Converted Catholic magazine, written by the ex-Catholic priest turned Protestant James J. Murphy. It's called The Japanese Vatican Entente. But I think just think about this, is that the Vatican, the time that when the Vatican decided to officially recognize the Empire of Japan was immediately after Pearl Harbor. That's when the Vatican decided to get into diplomatic relations with Japan. I think that tells you everything you need to know. And it was right after Pearl Harbor. That's when the ambassador from Japan to the Vatican, his name was Ken Harada. He was a knight of Saint Sylvester. So they completely controlled it. And we mentioned after the Americans came in, you can see a photo of Jesuit Edmund Walsh. He was at the Japanese Parliament with Douglas MacArthur as they were rewriting the Japanese Constitution in 1948. And it was it was probably under Jesuit Edmund Walsh's, because they say it was Douglas MacArthur who made this decision, but it was probably Edmund Walsh who made the decision that Emperor Hirohito would not be prosecuted at all for war crimes, and that he could stay on as emperor as well. And then America installed the new Catholic Prime Minister, Shigeru Yoshida, afterwards. And you can see a photo of him with Pope Pius XII too, the first Prime Minister of Japan after the American military occupation, or the Allied occupation, because there was British Commonwealth soldiers there as well.
Eric, I think that's proof. If you combine that with your fantastic work on Iraq, I don't think there's any further need of proof that the United States of America is the sword arm of the Vatican. And from the Christian perspective, it completely explains Revelation 13, the beast of the land that forces all to worship the beast of the sea. Wherever the United States military goes, after the death and destruction, it rebuilds in favor of Rome, whether it's Japan, Iraq, you name it.
Well, actually, in South Korea, interestingly, the first South Korean ambassador to the United States, Chung Man, was a Roman Catholic priest. He went through a seminary. He was one of the vice presidents during Sigmund Rhee's regime as dictator of South Korea. South Korea is like a Romerican puppet state too. There was the American military government that was stationed there from 45 to 47. And that's why their CIA is called the KCIA, just like the CIA in the United States. And that's why Sun Myung Moon, the Jesuits, and the CIA got along so well, because there's a long relationship there. But his name was Chang Mong, was the one of the prime ministers during Sigmund Rhee's presidency of South Korea. He was the first ambassador to America from South Korea after independence.
Wow, a priest.
So a Catholic priest. Incredible. And then they did this in Vietnam too with Ngo Diem. They installed him in power in the 50s, created a dictatorship there, and then after Nguyen Thuc, who became president in 1967 in South Vietnam, was also a devout Roman Catholic.
Oh, excuse me, could I throw in something else? We're talking about Los Angeles and Los Angeles County a moment ago, and the sheriff of LA County, Alex Villanueva. Forgive me for saying the obvious. The sheriff in any county is the highest law enforcement officer in that jurisdiction. Something else I did not mention is the mayor of LA, Eric Garcetti, who was born in 1971. Now, people like to blow up the fact that his mother was Jewish and she's of Russian Jewish descent. However, his father was Roman Catholic. And I just came across something from last year how Garcetti went over to Rome and met with Jorge, had an audience, and they specifically talked about that. So, oh yes, Jorge, or however you address him, he said, yes, my mom was Jewish, but my dad was Mexican Roman Catholic. So, you have Bill de Blasio, the mayor of the largest city in America, who's Roman Catholic. You have Eric Garcetti, who's the mayor of the second largest city in America, who's half Roman Catholic. You have, was it Lori Lightfoot, who is the mayorette of Chicago, the third largest city in America. I don't know what her religious background is, but she's lesbian.
George, at the Chicago City Hall, at the entrance door, there's a big Roman fasces right at the front of the entrance door to Chicago City Hall.
And we covered yesterday. Eric, that far left homosexual Lightfoot, the mayorette, the black female mayorette of Chicago, will arrest anyone that she considers a risk from the coronavirus. So if you believe the coronavirus is a hoax, or if you are supposedly positive with the coronavirus, really any reason that she deems fit, she will sick the police on you.
And of course, we've talked about what happened in Vancouver, British Columbia, but something else that I heard on the radio yesterday, speaking of Bill de Blasio, that he'll fine any person or business at least $500 per violation of the social distancing.
Yeah, I lost my mind yesterday when I saw how the New York Compost is pushing the PSYOP hard, pushing the outrageous, ridiculous PSYOPs hard of promoting of some goofball woman that supposedly she purposely refused to have the social distancing and now she's got the coronavirus. Absolutely ridiculous. They are this is overreach. I was walking my dog the other day and a neighbor yelling into his phone about what a PSYOP the coronavirus is. This is overreach for them. They're pushing too hard.
Well, I can see with the social distancing, this is going to be a way to crush all future protests or any dissent, like any type of public gathering, protesting anything going on financially, or a protest of the bishops raping kids and getting the police to cover it up over and over again, for instance. But any type of protest like this, you're going to say, oh, no, we're shutting this protest down, state of emergency, social distancing. We don't want the coronavirus to spread.
Okay, so
I do think they're going to use this, though, to clamp down hard on his future, and it's tougher now to just communicate with people in general and share this information because everyone's scared to be around each other. Like I was even in a bank, a couple days ago, and people were yelling at each other to stay 6 feet away. People are pretty worked up over this. And I would just say another big thing I noticed is with the digital currencies. I think because the Vatican has been openly calling for a new economic order for quite some time now.
I've seen this coming with the blowing up of the Bitcoin. I knew that Bitcoin was a massive PSYOP. The fact that it is just owns alternative media and the truth community. Check this out. Baby Andrew in the chat says, here in the UK, they're running TV ads with drone footage of people outside doing things that are non-essential. Hey, they should just call the cops on them and they should swat them right away. You see somebody outside doing something non-essential, they should be swatted right away. We're probably not far from that.
So are you saying, but eventually, okay, but I'm not the first person to bring this up, but there's a whole debate as to what is essential and what is non-essential. Now, you could, okay, most people would say food, medical, things like that. However, but then there's different classifications, such as they've shut down pretty much all drinking establishments, like bars, because hey, you can drink at home. But you can say bars will usually serve food like hamburgers or sandwiches or whatever, and you can make the argument there. But then it gets down to value judgments. Well, you could say, well, people shouldn't be drinking anyway. Some people are of that opinion. However, but there's an underlying Eric just hinted at this, but there's an underlying issue. We are social creatures by nature. We want to get out and stretch our legs. It gets boring after a while just walking around your block. Now I live in California, and what we've been noted for a long time, generations, is the beauty, the physical beauty, being able to go to the beach, go to the park, go to a regional park over the hills and trees and things like that. And for a while, for about a week or so, we had that reprieve. Well, I can't go out and watch a movie or bowling or whatever, but at least I can go to a regional park and go up hills and things like that. And but
it's overreach, George. Yes, absolutely. It's absolute micromanaging, overreach, outrage. Ice is nice in Kanakistan. Is I hope that you're talking about Canada. In Kanakistan, the authorities and the media are pushing that this could last many months. It's already overreach, and the more they push, the more they lock it down. The tighter they close the grasp, the more their star systems will slip through their fingers. But right now, it's absolutely outrageous.
Oh yeah, I'll link the video. Bill Gates went on CNN a couple of days ago, and he was saying that this is Bill Gates, who attends Roman Catholic Church, and his wife Melinda is a devout Roman Catholic. And actually, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation gave the startup money to the Jesuit Cristo Rey High School program that started in the early 2000s. Just some interesting background information. I have a New York Times article on that I'll link. But Bill Gates was saying that America needs to shut down, like on the Chinese style, advocating a full-out military lockdown of the entire United States, even the states that only have like 2 or 3 coronavirus cases, like the states in the Midwest. But Gates was saying we need to do a full Chinese style lockdown for a duration.
Yeah, starting with him. He and his daddy have a long history of hatred towards all humanity. Daddy, Bill too, and I'm sure his Catholic wife, all very big on the slaughter of the unborn. Daddy in particular is very big. Daddy Gates very big on ripping children out of mothers' wombs, monsters that they all are. So surprised that Gates, piece of shit puppet, would be given the billions and the control of Microsoft.
Yeah, I have to look into it just because I have to. Because I know Quartz Magazine even put out an article recently about Google being like a CIA startup operation or a CIA front. I'm sure there's something with that with Microsoft too. Gates is probably
absolutely.
The front man that they put out.
Just a figurehead. That fucking dork is just a figurehead. They were real big with Roman Catholic Margaret Sanger, the ghoul behind Planned Slaughterhood. Jeremy says Florida has checkpoints already. Yeah, what are they? Had they given the state stormtroopers coronavirus tests for their Batman utility belts? What a joke the coronavirus test is, by the way.
Yeah, it was shown. I think Nick sent the paper a paper from the NIH showed that in the asymptomatic cases, there's an 80% false positive rate. Which like we met, Dr. Robert Wilner showed that the HIV virus was like 99.7% false positive. That was, and I think that's a big part of this agenda too, is to like we said, like and they've already. I know the Washington Post did an article in the U.S. They're going to invoke the Patriot Act, which was written by Jesuit professor V. Din at Georgetown. But they're going to use. They're going to spy on people's like locations with their cell phones to enforce social distancing. And I know they did this in Israel too, where they're now tracking people's phone. They're tracking the phones of so-called coronavirus victims and people who are close to coronavirus patients. And then so they're tracking your phones, and then they're going to direct you to go into quarantine. If you don't go into quarantine, I'm sure you're going to see these fines and start to come your way. And maybe they'll start throwing you in jail. They're emptying out a lot of the jails all across the world.
That's another outrage. Particularly in far left Catholic New Jersey and far left Catholic controlled California. They demand the citizens hunker down and not even go out for a beer or a nice meal. And meanwhile, they're pushing criminals into the fucking streets. Absolutely unbelievable. Everything you need to know about how thoroughly corrupt these monsters, these pieces of shit are. Demand the citizens destroy and ruin their lives and hole up in their homes. And in many of those locations, the cops will come out and fucking arrest you. But meanwhile, the fucking cops are kicking the prisoners out onto the streets.
Okay, Johnny, can I chime in? So you're talking, I heard this is over a week ago, maybe like 10 days ago, that something like 20% of working adults or people who would normally be at work are not. That was, as I said, over a week ago. Because, and even in the businesses that are still open, like your supermarkets and your restaurants and others that are deemed to be essential, business is way down. This is purely anecdotal. That something like all these places, their sales are down 40, 50% because people are paranoid about going to the supermarket to get a gallon of milk because they might catch something. So you have these businesses that are shut down, and you have these businesses whose sales are falling way off. This could be, people don't know. I mean, it's hard to fathom what a huge financial disaster this can be. And something we were talking about yesterday is the U.S. Congress was talking about a $2 trillion stimulus package. And where are they going to get this money? Are they going to look under the couch cushions? Are they going to have a lemonade stand or something?
Well, George, we covered this before. I'm afraid to look up. The mom and pop businesses are the lifeblood of real capitalism. The local businesses are the lifeblood. It is the big mega corporations that are destroying us all, that you have the most corruption with. And I don't even want to look up the destruction of the mom and pop businesses as a result of this hoax.
And okay, this is something we discussed yesterday in previous broadcasts. Now the corporations are going to survive. Walmart, Target, and your fast food chains, McDonald's, Burger King, because they have, and there may be some individual franchises that don't survive, but as an aggregate, they will make it. And this is going to be a death blow, as you said, to traditional mom and pop brick and mortar businesses. And there are other things that are contributing to this situation. One, the internet. People are getting more and more things online these days. And, Eric was just talking about this a few minutes ago. In that basically throughout this century, the 21st century, people have become more and more dependent upon the internet, their phone, their tablet, some sort of electronic device, which dictates their reality to them. Because of this situation, whether it's real is almost a different conversation, is almost immaterial. Most people believe it is real. So, and something they've been talking about is, I believe Fauci came out and said they're talking roughly a year and a half before they can come out with a vaccine. So you're talking, September, October of next year. So that would be the remainder of this year and almost all of next year. And And of course, they're talking about possible waves of this. So this could be. So you're not just talking a shutdown of a few weeks. You're talking months, years, and people. Even if Donald Trump were to come out tomorrow or whoever and wave his magic wand and say, "This crisis is over. Everything is taken care of. Go back to normal," people won't, because people will be traumatized. They're saying, "Well, how do we know what he said is true? Maybe it'll come back. So maybe we should have this whole idea of social distancing as part of our psyche, and we should, it should become part of our standard operating procedure."
Well, George, I'm sure they have used their predictive technologies to see exactly how much they could get out of this hoax, this false flag, this psychological operation. I'd like to think that months is tremendous overreach, but the power of make-believe is tough to fathom. They really have a chokehold with the combination of extreme corruptocrat scum in both the media and in government. They have a lot of pull.
Well, I would say with Fauci, I wouldn't be surprised. Well, I don't know if they'd go this angle, but it was interesting. It's a fact that Fauci, when he was at the NIH, when they were, he was behind promoting AZT as a remedy for AIDS patients.
Oh,
AZT, is a DNA terminator. It actually causes AIDS. That's been proven. That the cancer
there
killing
it is.
that was too dangerous. They had to stop using it for treating cancer and chemo in the 60s because it was too toxic, and then they started using it for AIDS patients in the 80s. But it was this Jesuit Anthony Fauci, and I know he went to Jesuit Regis High School, Jesuit Holy Cross College, and his wife has like 3 Jesuit degrees. He's been at the NIH since like 1984. This guy to me is like a lay Jesuit.
He is a mass murdering criminal. He is a mass murdering criminal that should be executed. Should be in an orange jumpsuit and awaiting his execution. We covered at length the press. Not a release, but Dr. Robert Wilner that you sent out, the video of Robert Wilner talking to the press about the fraud of HIV and AIDS. HIV does not cause AIDS, and AIDS does not cause you to waste away and die. It's you getting diagnosed with AIDS and being given killer drugs like AZT, which waste you away and kill you. What a surprise that Fauci would recommend AZT cures coronavirus. I'll bet it does. AZT cures everything because you're dead. You're not going to catch anything once they give you AZT.
Well, so the fact that Fauci was, promoted, like he historically promoted it for the AIDS patients, like he's probably gonna, like the remedy that they're gonna give for the coronavirus or the vaccine is gonna be extremely toxic, and this is what Fauci was the head of the NIH when during the H1N1 breakout, and anyone can read the vaccine insert on the H1N1 on the FDA.org website. It even says that it could cause influenza type symptoms, which H1N1 is influenza. And it says that the vaccine has not been tested for carcinogenic potential, mutagenic potential, or impairment of fertility. And they all admit this in the product insert. We're seeing, Bill Gates, too. Like Bill Gates is, advocating, everyone needs to get vaccinated. I've even seen that the Gates has put out the idea of like putting in like a microchip that will when you scan it, it'll turn a certain color, and it'll know if you've been tested for the coronavirus or not. I think that the forced vaccinations could be an agenda with this too. But the fact that this Jesuit Anthony Fauci is the head decision maker in this, is not ideal for us at all. Makes me think that something bad's going to happen, or like the remedy drug that's going to be promoted that cures coronavirus is actually going to do more harm than good. Just like what happened with the AZT and AIDS.
We talked about this yesterday, and this is a fantastic point by Dr. Robert Wilner. This explains the whole HIV/AIDS process, explains how AIDS apparently is so demographic specific in some geographic locations and not in others. How AIDS apparently just wipes out homosexuals and drug users in one location and is completely indiscriminate in other locations like Africa, because they're being targeted. They are diagnosed with AIDS, whether they have AIDS or not, and given poison to murder them. It's medical genocide.
You know, in the Jesuits, like the main side, like Dr. Robert Gallo, he was at the front lines of, like he was the first scientist that said that HIV, he said HIV probably causes AIDS, and then it turned into HIV causes AIDS. But Dr. Robert Gallo was given a sword of Ignatius of Loyola by Jesuit St. Louis University. And I found another, I put this on my archive.org, found this from like a National Cancer Institute journal, but this Jesuit St. Louis University took down the link to this university magazine they had in 2008, which described, or it showed, they had a block of text highlighting Gallo receiving the sword of Loyola, but that's now off the internet. But that's a fact that Dr. Robert Gallo received his sword of Loyola from the Jesuits in 1988. Interestingly, the current director of the CDC, Robert Redfield, who has 2 degrees from Jesuit Georgetown, he was working with Gallo back in the 80s on this AIDS research as well. You know, it all kind of ties in.
The hypocrisy, the unbelievable hypocrisy of the Jesuit-run medical industry, and I say medical in the same way I say Justice Department, injustice, death industry for the medical industry. The hypocrisy of the medical industry, mass murdering homosexuals, is just sickeningly ironic, because the Vatican runs on sodomy. The Vatican owns sodomy, men and boys, and in a move of extreme self-hatred, they turn around and selectively slaughter rank and file homosexuals. Go ahead, George. The ironic hypocrisy is just amazing to me.
Well, you know, it's just like something. Well, I'm really not sure how to respond to that, but this all goes back
how
to.
How about this, George? How about this? We had, as I sent you out in an email, we have the vignette of the Third Reich, the Jesuit-run, Catholic-created Nazi Third Reich, also being created on sexual deviancy and homosexuality, and the Gestapo and the Nazis attacking and persecuting rank and file homosexuals. Another example.
Oh, and just like now, like the head medical advisors in America are lay Jesuits. You know, Hitler's personal eugenicist was a Jesuit named Hermann Muckermann. And he was head of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, a eugenicist think tank in Germany during the 1920s and 30s.
Excellent connection. Excellent connection. And baby Andalou, let's not forget that your Prime Minister Boris is the first overt Catholic. Unlike Tony Blair, that waited to slink away out of power before pretending to, oh, you know what? That Catholicism is a good idea. Maybe I'll join them.
But, you know, Boris Johnson supposedly now has the coronavirus.
Yeah, what a joke.
I think that's playing into the psyop. You know, Doc sent the Pope Francis did a prayer at the empty St. Peter's Square a couple of days ago. Now the Pope's gonna pray away the coronavirus. I bet they're actually gonna line up this psyop where the numbers are probably actually gonna start going down, and everyone's gonna be, oh, the power of the Rosary and the Pope saved us from this virus. Like, let's listen to the Pope more on what he has to say about how our economy should be aligned. You know, for instance.
Agreed. That's my sense. They know that on a full-on hoax, there's only so much that they can do in faking the casualties. So as far as I can sense, there are a lot of limits with that. And so this is the beginning of the end of this hoax, but this false flag, this specious ensign. But they have done a lot of damage through it. And just like you say, it'll start with the miracles of these Roman Catholic insurgent scum, these tyrant politicians. What a great job they did being led by their Pope praying away the coronavirus.
So is that anything like praying the gay away?
I don't know. Ask Michael Voris.
Oh, okay. So,
well, and George, just before, just for I need to get this name memorized. What was the name of the Jesuit gay theologian again?
O'Neill, John O'Neill.
Oh, John O'Neill. Okay, I think that shows the Jesuits are behind that agenda as well. That there's a queer. There was a Jesuit queer theologian.
Well, he invented what is called queer theology, and anyhow, okay, maybe this is my perception, and this has probably always been the case, or has been the case for generations. If we can just talk about the current U.S. president, Donald Trump, it doesn't seem as if almost every phase of his presidency has been scripted. They seem to have. He needs to be in constant conflict. And he appears to be at odds with the Democrats and with most media. First with Paul Ryan, who is a speaker, now Nancy Pelosi again. And they always seem to have all these problems, embroglios. First is Russian collusion. It was the Robert Mueller investigation, the Mueller report, the Mueller testimony, the impeachment inquiries, with the Intelligence Committee, the Judiciary Committee, the impeachment hearings, the trial in the House and the trial in the Senate, and I guess all those little sideshows petered out. So this was the new scandal, although it's not really new. I know I mentioned this before, but according to Shawnee or Chineke, the Jesuits always plan things out roughly 50, 100 years ahead of time. And they weren't necessarily thinking about Donald Trump in 2020, but they're thinking about whoever the presidential puppet would be at the time. So this obvious was in the books no later than the year 1970. They knew that they're going to have some sort of they needed some sort of viral 9/11 because, I'm purely speculating here. You can only pull off so many mass shootings and so many bombings. They needed to mix the game up a little bit.
You say mix the gay up?
The game.
Oh, sorry. Let me, a correction, George. It's John McNeil. And the psyop is that he was forced out of the Jesuits and the Catholic.
Oh, yes.
And listen, you snuck this in on me yesterday. Terrence McNally, the homosexual Catholic playwright. You snuck that in when I wasn't paying attention. What a find. Octogenarian, the coronavirus got him. Homosexual, raised Irish Roman Catholic, a celebrated playwright. Catholic themes throughout his work to include homosexual erotica version of the gospel. Unbelievable outrage. And he was given cover by the Latin Mass conservatard Catholics supposedly attacking him from the Catholic League. And the coronavirus finally got him. What a joke. And I wouldn't doubt if he was assassinated by Rome after living a full life and fulfilling his. So he has been sacrificed for yet another agenda.
Oh, so are you talking about John Edgar Hoover? I know technically speaking he was a Protestant, or were you talking about Terry McNally?
I'm sorry, I was talking about Terry McNally, but J. Edgar Hoover did the exact same thing and was also given the sword of Loyola.
Right, yeah, right after they killed Kennedy, and I think he had 15 honorary degrees from, or 15 different Catholic universities honored him.
Well, yes. By the way, I just finished that tome you recommended a while back. The Catholic Church. I'm sorry, the FBI of the Catholic Church, 1935 to 62, by Steve Rossworm. On the cover is from 1942, where Hoover is receiving an honorary degree from Notre Dame.
Yeah, outstanding.
That first chapter. There's tons of information on Hoover. I believe Hoover even spoke at the valedictorian or at the commencement addresses at when the graduates from Jesuit Holy Cross were graduating. Hoover would speak there regularly. And he would write articles in the Catholic Archdiocesan newspapers. For instance, it was in that book too. The quote's in that book too. But Cardinal Richard Cushing referred to. He said that whenever I refer to J. Edgar Hoover, that's like referring to the Pope.
Well, speaking of Richard James Cardinal Cushing, who lived from 1895 to 1970, he was the Catholic Archbishop of Boston, Mass, from 1944 to his death. He was instrumental in a number of things. You could say, he was like the number 2 churchman in America in the Spellman era. Among other things, Cushing was a member of the NAACP, and there's pictures of him online. Meeting with Martin Luther King and Billy Graham. As a matter of fact, Cushing actually pulled a string for Graham, I guess, in the 1950s to actually have one of his crusades in Boston.
Yeah, we can do an entire show on how Billy Graham was controlled opposition. I do not expect to see, as a Christian, I do not expect to see Billy up there when I make it.
Oh, are you talking about Scottish Rite 33rd degree Freemasonic William Franklin Graham, father of Franklin Graham?
Yeah, George, one and the same. You bet.
Oh, okay. Well, if I can mention something on a more personal note, just wanted to mention Robert Charles O'Brien Jr., who was born in 1966. He is the current national security advisor to President Trump. I mentioned this on a local note. He went to Cardinal Newman High School in Santa Rosa. And he's also on the coronavirus task force. Now, I know I brought this up before. This whole PSYOP, this whole false flag, what exactly is it? I keep hearing people using different names. COVID-19, the coronavirus, the Chinese virus, the Wuhan virus, the Kung Flu virus. So what is it?
Well, George, that reminds me of the relabeling of ISIS. ISIS, ISIL, IS. When you start to question these dangers, these fabricated dangers, then there's a need to relabel it as you examine it. What's the adage? The king has no clothes?
Yes. I believe it's the emperor has no clothes.
Right, the emperor has no clothes. Thank you. Don't pay any attention to the man behind the curtain. You bet. Yeah, Jeremy says we're not going to hear any of this information from John Hagee, Joel Osteen, T.D. Jakes, Tony Smith, David Manning. James David Manning. No kidding, Jeremy. We've mentioned this earlier. You're never going to hear from these Luciferian frauds of Christianity that Rome is the fourth and final beast, the whore drunk on the blood of the saints, and you're never going to hear the truth about false flags like 9/11 from any of those puppet frauds. That's how they're household names. We've talked about that before.
I was saying Olstein and the likes of them. Like I linked this article from this came from KSLA 12 News from 2007, but this article is titled "Homeland Security," or more properly titled "Romeland Security Enlists Clergy to Quell Public Unrest If Martial Law Ever Declared." I don't know if this is the clergy response team, but that is a program that the Department of Homeland Security has created. So in the event of martial law, they're going to send out all the fraud pastors, and they're going to say to everyone, just submit to the government tyranny that's going on. And they're going to quote like Romans 13. That's mentioned in this article, that the pastors are going to say that the government is ordained of God, so just submit. So, but the Homeland Security and the Jesuits are working with especially all the co-opted Protestant clergy in the United States to set up these clergy response teams in the event of martial law. And we're seeing kind of a soft martial law, take place right now. Trump did declare a national emergency federally. I think the National Guard has been deployed in 35 states. You can see footage of tanks going into LA and big cities. But I think that's a reason too. I think the clergy are completely silent on what's going on right now.
A couple of streams ago, we put to rest the Jesuit heresy of Romans 13 means be completely subservient to your satanic government. It is a conditional relationship that Paul wrote in conditional code. Notice that Paul says, fear your government, for God instituted it for good and righteousness. And as long as you are being righteous and good, you have nothing to fear from the government. Was that true of the Roman Empire back then? No. Is that true of any government now? No. Do you therefore have to obey either of them? No. Paul wrote that in code because his priority was to spread the gospel and save souls, and not have the Roman Empire come bearing down on him and the fledgling church. It's absolutely conditional. The government is not for good. The government has never been for good. The government does not do good. Therefore, you are not obligated to do absolutely everything the government tells you. You do need to be smart and understand that if you disobey all of the boy-buggering scum who have all the guns and the armored personnel carriers, you will receive their wrath. But in no way does the Bible require you to obey Satan. Absolute Jesuit psyop and rewrite, and every so-called Christian pastor, public figure that promotes it works for Satan. George, can I get an amen?
No, I agree with you there. Absolutely, it's serving the Jesuits in the Vatican. And
it's conditional.
Even if you're non-Christian, there is a metaphoric Satan in this world. It's the Vatican.
Good for you. Hey, listen, this is Eric speaking from the non-Christian point of view. If you non-Christians want to go after Satan, destroy the Catholic Church. You Christians simply need to understand that above the Catholic Church is Satan. But just like in devout Roman Catholic John Ronald Reuel Tolkien's stories, without the Catholic Church, Satan has no body. Satan needs the infrastructure of the Catholic Church to do his dirty work for him.
The Catholic Church, they're going to be capitalizing big. I saw the article you said. The Catholic hospitals are going to get a huge payout with this coronavirus bailout package. And every single year, according to the Merger Watch report titled The Miscarriage of Medicine, I have that on my archive.org account. I'll link that. Catholic hospitals every year in America bill the government around $120 billion. But they're expected to probably reap in something. I bet they're going to reap in probably 500 billion up to maybe $1 trillion with this coronavirus heist.
That reminds me.
The emergency savings bill that's going through the House.
Yeah, so there's some ludicrous amount. By the way, Terry, God bless you. You're welcome to quote me, cite me at any time, and I'll be happy to give you that again anytime you need it. That reminds me of how the United States government pays the Catholic Church to break federal law and continue to bring in millions upon millions of illegal Roman Catholic immigrants. You taxpayers pay the Catholic Church to break your laws. In the same way that we now have some ridiculous nation crippling, destroying debt, 23, 24, 26 trillion dollars. The numbers you're never going to even imagine the actual numbers of it. And in the midst of that outrage, the United States government of Romerica and her papal puppets in power are going to give away more money, and it's all going back, not all of it, more gifts, free gifts, taxpayer gifts back to the Catholic Church, who is propagating this coronavirus hoax. Fantastic job by Nick to show how their metaphor, their coronavirus, is actually Mary worship, and it's not Mary. It's Isis, it's Semiramis, it's Aphrodite, it's Columbia.
Oh, Johnny, that reminds me. Something that Donald Trump has come out and said is he said he wants everything to open up shop again, so to speak, by Sunday, April the 12th, Easter.
Oh, I missed that, George. So Trump is going to extend it another 10 more days, 14, another 2 more weeks, but he's requiring everybody to be open for Ishtar, right? And boy, I wish we had Nick with us, because Nick would be able to really go to bat on the Jesuit fabricated calendar. It says in, I think it's Daniel, is it Daniel 2? That talks about the Antichrist, the power of the Antichrist changing times and laws. I got to look it up real quick. But it was Jesuit Christopher Clavius who took the Roman Julian calendar and made it even worse, our so-called Gregorian calendar, to guarantee that the death and resurrection of Jesus will never match the biblical account by warping our dates for us.
Yes. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole relitigate, whether people should observe holy days, Christmas, December 25th, or Easter. However, Easter, Christmas is always December the 25th. However, the date of Easter fluctuates. Now, as this is a bit convoluted, it is the first Sunday after the first full moon of the spring equinox in the Northern Hemisphere. Say that 10 times fast. So this year, most professed Christians will observe it on, as I said, April the 12th. But sometimes it can be in late March, so you have roughly a month-long window. Sometimes it's in late March, sometimes it's in late April. And boy, I thought Christopher Columbus was supposed to make the calendar easier, more accurate. But that only brings confusion, or at least it does to me.
Well, I think I heard Phelps make this point. I think it makes sense. I think possibly with the Clavius, they want the new year to be celebrated when it's like the dead of winter, like all vegetation is dead and it's cold outside. Mm-hmm. Rather than the new year traditionally, you'd think just with common sense, the new year should be spring when everything is sprouting up again. It's kind of like the symbolization of regeneration. So why are we celebrating New Year in the cold of winter when everything's dead outside? In terms of vegetables.
You know what else is critical, George? You know what else is critical to the Clavius calendar is our Jesuit false reality. By pushing the Clavius calendar, this aided the spinning globe propaganda of Roman Catholic priest Nicholas Copernicus.
Oh, okay. And so.
Oh yeah, real quick. I found that, Lauren. Thank you. It's Daniel 7:25 to rewrite times and laws, and not Daniel 2. Daniel 2 is Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and Daniel 7 is an incredibly important chapter because that's also Daniel's revelation of the 4 beasts that happens to match Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the 4 metals of the human statue. Go ahead, George. Didn't mean to cut you off.
Okay, so basically, Something, Johnny, you're mentioning earlier is you're talking about ISIS. Is it ISIS or is it ISIL? Almost everything is a psyop. Almost everything we say. For example, this is something that Michael Voris has been pushing for years, but especially lately, last few months, is he said, for example, he'll talk about the Marxist in the media, the news media, television, newspapers, and so forth. And that is a psyop, because I've been guilty of this myself. I'll say Marxist, but that's completely incorrect. They should say Jesuit or Jesuitical, because as we established before, it was the so-called Society of Jesus, that created communism 400 years ago in South America. Also, I've mentioned this before, is people will use the terms Darwinism or Darwinian evolution. There again, that is a psyop. Something that would be more accurate would be to calling it Lamarckianism, after Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, who was trained by the Jesuits. Lamarck lived a generation before Darwin. Well, they were contemporaries. Lamarck's dates were 1744 to 1829, and Charles Robert Darwin lived from 1809 to 1882. But as I said, Lamarck lived in the 18th and 19th centuries. He basically promulgated the same ideas that Darwin did. And he was trained by the Jesuits. And before,
this is I'm gonna have to, are you aware of any books out there that have been written comparing Lamarck's work to Darwin's? I'm gonna look into this more now, because it's I know you brought it up a few times, but it's very intriguing that this guy was Jesuit educated and his ideas were almost identical to Darwin.
And of course, you could say before Lamarck, I'm not aware of any, which is not to say there aren't. I had to look more into him again. And before Lamarck, you had Kirchner. In the 17th century, you had Anastasia Kirchner, who basically advocated the idea that after the animals got off the ark, then they began to evolve.
Yeah, George, I love the plausible deniability there. This is a fantastic point that you have made for us in the past, how Darwin is the plausible deniability of Jesuit false reality for so-called evolution. Einstein is the plausible deniability for Roman Catholic priest Georges Lemaitre, the Big Bang, Roman Catholic priest Nicholas Copernicus and his spinning globes. There's a lot of great examples.
Yeah, that Copernicus dedicated his book to the Pope, didn't he? On the revolutions of the celestial.
Yeah, A Revolutionibus. Yes, good for you. So, this just in from my buddy Rob. The governorette of Rhode Island, Gina Raimondo. Gee, I wonder what religion she is. Gina Raimondo is going to have the National Guard go door to door to find the coronavirus positives.
Well, Bill Gates' wishes of a Chinese-style lockdown are coming true, I guess.
For the Catholic puppets, fuck's sake, how many of these pieces of shit tyrant scumbags are fucking Catholics? We found one pulling this shit in Florida. We found one pulling this shit in Ohio. We have another one here in Rhode Island. The worst, we have that piece of shit pedophile bastard in New York. All of the worst tyrants pushing the worst of this coronavirus bullshit, surprise, surprise, are all Catholic.
Actually, the head of the World Health Organization is a Catholic. The Director General, Tedros Adhanom, if I'm pronouncing that his last name right, the director, the Roman Catholic director of the WHO, and the WHO in a recent report was praising China's to the coronavirus. Again, what is China's response to the coronavirus? It's just all-out government tyranny.
That piece of shit DeSantis in Florida is not only Catholic, he was a fucking Guantanamo Bay Navy lawyer to help defend the torture of innocent Middle Easterners to make them into jihadis. He's perfect. He's another one. He's going to institute coronavirus concentration camps. Yeah, real quick.
Is that working with the FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency?
I wouldn't doubt it. I'm sure he will be. So,
because this could be like a Rex 84. Like this is essentially what we're seeing. This is like a Rex 84 program that's being rolled out now under the guise of the coronavirus.
It's in the works. I would say they need actual dead bodies in the streets, which they probably don't want to risk at this point, unleashing a real virus, as George has already covered, because that's a two-edged sword. That's as much a danger to the insiders as the outsiders. They would probably need bodies in the streets to actually pull it off, but this certainly sets the stage for when they want to do that. Real quick to Ice is Nice in the chat. Listen, man, you've got that Jesuit, Nazi, Maltese cross, and skull. Makes me very hinky. All that shit traces back to Rome and the Jesuits, pal. So far it's been nothing but great comments, but you really should update that. Go back to your Snoopy icon, because, man, that shit is 100% Jesuit.
I was going to say another Jesuitical, like Mike Pompeo had a Jesuitical slip here. Mike Pompeo, okay, I'm going to pause this here. Can you guys, I'm going to screen share here. But he slipped up a few days ago and said that this is a live exercise. That was his exact quotes. Mike Pompeo, like you can read articles in the Jesuits American magazine. He's openly saying that the United States needs to ally itself with the Vatican, even more so in terms of foreign policy. Mike Pompeo, he had the famous quote where he said that at my time at the CIA, we lied, we cheated, we stealed. But yeah, this is pretty quick here, 35 seconds, but he calls the coronavirus an exercise here.
I thought it was a pandemic. The Chinese government was the first to know of this risk to the world. And that puts a special obligation to make sure that data gets to our scientists, our professionals. This is not about retribution. This matters going forward. We're in a live exercise here together. This matters going forward. We're in a live exercise here to get this right.
We're in a live exercise here to get this right.
Yeah, great catch. That's Mike Pompeo that had a prolonged private audience with the Pope recently.
Okay, Johnny.
Did he go with Mike? Did he go with Pence when Pence went to see the Pope just in January?
Maybe I'm getting them mixed up, but I swear Pompeo had. No, I'm probably getting them mixed up. That was Pompeo. That was Pence that had a prolonged private audience. Now evangelical Pence, who was born and raised devout Catholic, and everybody around him is still devout Catholic. His family and his offspring are still Jesuit trained, all of them Catholic. And Ice is Nice, back at you, bro. We're not here to shoot anybody down. Nothing but great comments from you. Just I would say just to improve that, because it's just a lot of red flags, bro.
Johnny.
Yeah, George.
You're talking about the governor of Rhode Island, old roadie Gina Marie Raimondo, and your suspicions are correct, sir. She was born in 1971, and she went to LaSalle Academy in Providence, and as a matter of fact, which is a Catholic school, and she graduated valedictorian.
Well, what a surprise, George. What a surprise. Like I've said, these bastards, this Roman Catholicism is a malignant, treasonous insurgency. We talked about this I think it was just yesterday, George. Supposedly at the founding of America, it was illegal for Catholics to vote because we knew this. By 1836, there was a Roman Catholic, Roger Taney, as Chief Justice, unaccountable to the citizenry of the United States Supreme Court. It is an absolute malignant insurgency. The worst of these tyrants pushing this hoax to outrageous degrees are all open Roman Catholics, not Jews, open Roman Catholics. Those are the ones entrusted with the most treasonous, criminal, outrageous acts.
Well, just like Trudeau here in Canada, another Roman Catholic, he's been saying some outrageous stuff. At one of his recent press conferences, he started off saying he told everyone to, quote, cut it out, to to get in line with the social distancing measures.
That's right. Stop it. Stop your complaining. Line up like cattle. He's not. That piece of shit's not going to do any of that. That piece of shit's living large. He doesn't give a shit. But he wants everybody else to line up like cattle.
Oh, absolutely. You never see any immigrants showing up at Trudeau's house, Roman Catholic Trudeau's house.
Yeah, right.
All about
Another handout.
flooding Canada and the flood, and just now demographically with this, how many immigrants are here in Canada, he might actually be in power for another 20 years.
Okay, Johnny.
His voting base is now huge.
And George, let me just mention to everybody that Kathy O'Brien, CIA sex trafficking victim, had a lot to say about Justin's daddy, Justin Castro Trudeau's daddy, as an arch pedophile piece of shit monster, child raping piece of shit Pierre Trudeau was.
Well, and of course, I just want to
she called him a Jesuit.
Yes, good for you. An ordained Jesuit, yes.
Okay, so you are correct again, Johnny. Yes, Pence did have a meeting with Jorge at the beginning of the year, and Mike Pompeo in October last year had an audience with Jorge. Now, Pompeo is supposed to be a Protestant, I believe, a Presbyterian.
Yeah, he's one of those sneaky creepos that does not have a lot of overt Jesuit breadcrumbs around him, but we're piecing it together, George. Keep going.
Oh, okay. So, if you have a meeting with the pontiff and you're not a Catholic, okay, it's bad enough if you're in elected office or you're holding some sort of governmental position that you have an audience with him. I can understand that if you're Catholic, sort of, but if you're non-Catholic, that's a real head scratcher. And
Bernie Sanders went to see the Pope not too long ago. But again, the popes have been persecuting Jewish people for thousands of years. So it is a little odd why Bernie would go get his marching orders from the Pope. And that was in 2021.
Well, Bernie Sanders' wife is Catholic.
Oh, there you go. No, great information.
Yeah, and I love
Bernie Sanders. He refuses to criticize Roman Catholic Joe Biden in any shape. He's like, oh, Joe Biden's a great guy. He'll beat Trump. Go out and vote for Joe Biden if he's the candidate. He refuses to call Joe Biden corrupt, which is it's objectively true that Joe Biden is completely corrupt.
And I love to continue to bring up how he jumped out of his ass. Was it 2014 or in the previous election? Jumped out of his ass and illegally used campaign funds to run to Rome to get his marching orders. Far left Jew that he is, illegally used campaign funds to run to Rome to get his instructions in a private audience. Right?
Well, something, not to pick on Bernie, came out last year for something he's been thumbing for years is $15 an hour minimum wage. Well, it turns out that Bernie wasn't paying his own staffers that much. And so to rectify that situation, he said, okay, tomorrow we're going to pay them that. However, to make up for the loss, we'll just simply cut their hours. And that
reminds me, after Jeff Bezos was forced to pay his workers more, he just said that we're just going to replace them all with robots.
Okay, but this correlates to what we've been talking about today and for the last several broadcasts. This is okay. You can talk about the internet, you can talk about mechanization, you can talk about outsourcing, sending your jobs out of country in general, and China in particular. But this is also going to make employees even more expendable.
Yeah, good point. Good point. I'm surprised that they have not hammered people more financially. The precedent is absolutely there. The precedent is set.
Of course, you might get, okay, this is something our Eric and I have talked about before. This is last year. In that it seems as if in the West in general and America in particular, there always needs to be some sort of boogeyman, some sort of nefarious, nebulous force that's out to get you. For most of the 20th century, it was communism, and mostly from Russia and other places. And briefly, it was Nazis or fascists. But now, for about the last 20 years or so, it's been terrorists, those Muslim terrorists who hate all of our freedoms and liberties. But now we have a new enemy. It's called viruses. And however, it's very hard to shoot or blow up a virus.
Well, George, we discussed this over the phone. I would not be surprised to see a war on viruses in the same way that these phony fraud bastards have spent trillions on war on poverty, war on guns, war on drugs, blah, blah, blah. I expect this to go on concurrently with the active so-called war on terror, also outrageous treason.
Well, absolutely. This could be like the new war on terror. And just, Jesuit-trained Emmanuel Macron declared a war on the virus. Jesuit-trained Trump declared a war on the virus. Trudeau, Jesuit-trained Trudeau has declared war on the virus. And I would say with Trudeau's, with Cathy O'Brien saying that Pierre Trudeau is a Jesuit priest and Pierre Trudeau being a sexual deviant, you can actually see photos of Pierre Trudeau with Mao Zedong in China. In 1972, I believe, Mao Zedong was a tyrant who murdered, estimated the low estimate, like 40 million of his own Chinese citizens.
Eric,
but the exact quote from Pierre Trudeau was that Mao Zedong has contributed greatly to the modernization of China. End quote. That was from that was in a Maclean's. That was written in Pierre Trudeau's memoirs that you can get on libgen.is. But that quote is in a Maclean's article that exposed the Trudeau's love of communist dictators. It also just highlights in that Maclean's article how the Trudeaus have said great things about the Castros in Cuba. But it's really interesting. Pierre Trudeau was praising Mao Zedong, who is one of the bloodthirstiest tyrants in the human history.
For a Western Democrat, Trudeau certainly did like far left communists. They spent a lot of time with Castro. He was loving up on Mao Zedong. Monster. Mao Zedong may have murdered anywhere from 70 to 100 million Chinese. If there is a Jesuit agenda, it was that. Absolute monster.
And of course, you can't throw then there's Joseph Stalin. And you're talking basically the same types of numbers. It's hard to reckon how many people both Stalin and Mao Zedong killed. I mean, eventually you're going to run out of zeros. And so you're probably talking...
Oh, and add Roman Catholic Pol Pot to the mix. Just those three.
Pol Pot, relatively speaking, you could say it was the same numbers. You're talking like maybe 2 or 3 million out of 8 million people. However, relatively speaking, so that was like a fourth, a third of the population. So if you index those numbers for America, that would be like 100 million people, thereabouts.
Yeah, and Roman Catholic King Leopold II of Belgium wiped out half the population of the Congo, 10 million people murdered in a span of 10 years by Roman Catholic Leopold II and the Belgian military authorities from like 1890 to 1910.
And Leopold basically has been disappeared from history. He didn't exist.
Yeah, quite the Catholic monster. You bet.
And of course,
I'm saying because he universally should be taught as like someone who is just as evil as Adolf Hitler. But like we're never told about Leopold II, especially his religious affiliation, how the Pope never excommunicated him.
Or Catholic trains Pol Pot, as Dude is mentioning in the chat, and his Khmer Rouge, another Roman Catholic genocidal monstrosity.
And of course, you could talk about, I know we've discussed it before, Idi Amin in Uganda back in the 1970s. As a matter of fact, you're talking almost the exact same dates. Idi Amin in Uganda, 1974 75 to 79, and Pol Pot, basically the same years in Cambodia. I mentioned this before. Paul Amin lived, I believe, from approximately year 1923 to 2003. They're not exactly sure when he was born, so he was about 80 years old when he died. Well, there was an article that came out in the UK Independent after Amin's death, and it was just like a throwaway line. And they said, "Oh yes, Amin was installed in the early 1970s by the CIA and British MI6, and they maintained him in power during his entire administration."
You say the same thing about Jesuit priest Jean-Baptiste Aristide in Haiti.
Yes. Now, for this year and last year, I can't do it anymore because they've canceled them all. But in the spring, for over the last 35 years, in the spring semester by local state college, they do something called the Holocaust and Genocide lecture series. And I mentioned this before, and I've gone to a few of them this year, and I went to several last year. And we had a speaker. The last time I went, which was a few weeks ago, we had a speaker come in and talk about the Armenian genocide, and she had a vested interest because her grandparents survived it. But anyhow, I was talking during the Q&A section. The talk is about an hour and a half, so they have like 15, 20 minutes where you can ask the speakers questions. And I asked her, I said, "Excuse me, Professor, don't remember her name. Why is it some things are classified as genocides and other things are not?" And specifically, I mentioned Idi Amin. Now, he extirpated something like over 250,000 heretics in Uganda, most of whom were at least nominally Protestants. The majority of them were Anglicans, but at least they were non-Catholics. Now, Amin, in addition to his nexus to Western intelligence, grew up, his father was Roman Catholic. Now, he was Sunni Muslim. And I asked the professor, why was what Amin did not considered a genocide? Was it, do you have to have a minimum number of people involved? Does there need to be 100,000 people killed, 1 million people? Does it have to be a certain percentage of the population? And this is where things get nebulous, because when we're talking about genocide, people will talk about what happened to the Jews in Europe in the 1930s and 40s. And yes, that was a genocide. But usually it will have to either be religiously motivated or ethnically motivated. They're targeting a certain population.
Yeah, George. And so let me jump in, and I want you to finish your thought, but I also want to jump in. Language is a weapon, but language is also the tool of the people. And there's what the corrupted piece of shit experts tell us our language is, and there's how we use it. And how I use genocide is common sense. Genocide is a targeted slaughter of a specific demographic, either religious, gender, ethnicity, a specific demographic that is slaughtered wholesale. Common sense definition. But that's not the weapon that they want to use against us language-wise. George, keep going.
Well, actually, I prefer an older term, and it's almost archaic, extirpation. That is, just like Inquisition, just like Crusade, that is a Catholic-specific term. That means killing your enemies, heretics or any other. And we've discussed this before. In the fourth vow of the Jesuits, or the extreme oath, they talk about how I will extirpate all heretics and liberals. So we need to use the correct language. And by the way, speaking of crusades, you could say over the last half millennia, since the time of the Protestant Reformation, almost all wars have been de facto papal crusades. And you could say probably 100% of civil wars have been de facto papal crusades.
Absolutely. Yeah, so Eric, I don't know how long you wanted to go, brother. We're coming up on 2 hours. I probably am going to check out at 2 hours.
Yeah, I'm good to go at 2 hours here, another 10 minutes or so. We can.
All right, George, wrap us up.
Okay, so something we were discussing yesterday and in previous broadcasts. What is the end game here? What is the goal? I mean, if you look at 9/11, and I'm sure Eric probably barely remembers that since he was just a child, is they didn't do that just, they said, boy, just as a justification to go to war, to go into crusade, but just to go into physical war. But they also use it as a justification for psychological warfare. For example, most people in the West, because I remember like 15 years ago, I was in Heathrow. And if you go to Heathrow, it's just like JFK or O'Hare. They have the same draconian procedures, like you had to go through the line. They had to make sure that you're not a terrorist and you're not going to try to blow anybody up. And I remember hearing the announcements over there saying that if your car is left to the curb for more than 5 minutes, it'll be towed away. If you leave your bag unattended for a certain period of time, it'll be confiscated. And but something that confuses me, and I didn't grasp at the time, is George W. Bush came out and said that we need to the United States, need to launch this crusade into Afghanistan, later Iraq, to take out the terrorists who hate our freedoms and liberties. However, what are we doing? We're giving up our freedoms and liberties to fight the terrorists.
George, that's one of the main reasons I left the military, is when I came home from Iraq and people were buying me expensive meals in the freaking airport before I even got home. And then they'd turn around and hold their arms up to go and take their families through a naked body scanner. And it dawned on me, things aren't getting better, they're getting worse. It's an absolute outrageous. People need to wake up.
Well, because it's a similar situation with what's going on right now. Now we're not even a whole month into this whole situation. We're a few weeks, and people are changing psychologically. I can just talk empirically, and they're saying, "Boy, before you go to the store, make sure you have your mask on, and make sure you're at least 6 feet away from everybody else." Okay, and I'm not advocating Starbucks, but my local Starbucks closed a week ago, and they put up a sign saying that they gave you locations for other places where you can go if you wanted to go to the drive-through. And they put up a sign, well, we look forward to opening up again in a few weeks. And people have been conditioned to accept this. It's just like every day you had to watch the media, watch the news reports saying, what sort of restrictions are they going to place on us now? What sort of governmental restrictions and what sort of private restrictions are people placing on us, such as with supermarkets? For example, I mentioned my local supermarket has a policy of only allowing 75 people in at a time. Now, I know that you mentioned that somebody said in New Zealand it was only 5 there. Well, this varies from business to business. But I'd imagine soon this is going to be a governmental policy. They're going to say only X number of people can be in a supermarket at a certain period of time. Now, speaking of this local supermarket, they have a list of things on the door saying that a maximum number of items you can purchase, like 1 or 2 rolls of toilet paper, so many containers of hand sanitizer, things like that. The United States is turning into Venezuela almost overnight.
Yeah, the amount of manipulation and control is truly disturbing. They could end this farce, this hoax right now. If they wanted to. They've made tremendous gains. But George, I honestly believe that we have them on the run. Our numbers show that we're nothing. We're not even on their radar. But there's nobody else giving truth the way we do. And truth is extremely potent and extremely dangerous. And I'm convinced that the awakening to the Jesuit world order is part of the process, why they have done this hoax at this point in time, mixing in with the tremendous harm they've done from the never-ending mass shooting, false flags, specious ensigns. And we've talked about the red flag laws that the pedophile president has pushed and other Roman Catholic insurgent traitor scum have pushed to go in and confiscate the firearms of anyone they deem at risk. We got them on the run, and I think this is showing this, Eric. Go ahead.
Well, I agree. Well, I know a couple of governors have put red flag gun laws on the books as a direct result of the coronavirus. Yeah,
there's as many as like 17 states and some shocking locations. Some Midwest locations. I think Oregon is one of them. Colorado, not so shocking because Colorado has a lot of leftists and communists and Catholics in it. But some shocking states. Florida.
No, like what you're saying about the supermarket, I think what this is about too is like having the government control and regiment, every facet of your life. Telling you where you can go, when you can go, how much you can, buy. It's all control and regimentation.
Get used to it.
Well, and of course, there's all sorts of social shaming. Or is it you took 5 rolls of toilet paper instead of 4, or you tried to take a 5th? How dare you? You're a pariah. Well, hey, but and of course, there's this like, and now I mentioned what they at the beginning of the show. I mentioned what they're doing in British Columbia, Vancouver, but they're doing the same thing in New York City. Bill de Blasio has said he wants to fine $500 people and businesses who violate the social distancing. And of course, we've talked about Bill de Blasio before. And this should be help. If this doesn't wake people up, I don't know what else. We're talking about 9/11 and all the overt Roman agents that are involved with that, from Rudy Giuliani, the mayor of New York, George Pataki, the Catholic governor of New York, Bernard Kerik, the Catholic police chief, Tom Van Essen, the Catholic fire chief, the Tom Ridge, the Catholic governor of Pennsylvania, the future and the first director of Homeland Security. All those, if you just looked at those simple facts, that should wake up. That should have awoken people up to the fact that it was a purely Roman operation from stem to stern. And people need to realize, whether you're talking about Tiny Tony Fauci, to all these governors and mayors who are Catholic or Catholic control, this is also another Roman operation.
Great point, George. Whenever they pull a specious ensign, we have to be careful because even saying the words false flag will get us deleted from YouScrewed. As our stream got killed off, Nick's hosted stream got repeatedly deleted from my channel, because we linked 9/11 to the coronavirus. And that was an instant flagging from the boy buggering Jesuit scum at YouScrewed. But before they pull off something as massive as 9/11, they had all the critical bases covered with Roman Catholic insurgent assets and agents, completely covered.
Oh, okay, if I could mention one other thing. One of the things we talked about in one of my first broadcasts with you roughly 2 years ago is I just speculating. It's that when we talk about specious ensigns, foxtrots, there seems to be a hierarchy of them. And there's small, medium, and large. It's almost as if you're talking about French fries or drinks. Something like 9/11 or Pearl Harbor, those are big ones. Those require years and decades of planning. But then you have lower level ones that don't require as much, because you need to pull them off to keep people distracted and to keep people reminding, oh yes, we're in the war of terrorism. Therefore, we need to have some sort of Muslim attack or something like that. What is going on with the coronavirus, with this Plandemic, is a is a 9/11 type situation. It's in that same league. And 9/11 was almost 20 years ago.
Agreed. It is an absolute plandemic. It is an absolute hoaxed plandemic. And what's dangerous about it is they can do whatever they want. We talked about this yesterday, that Rand Paul supposedly corona positive. And I fully expect Rand Paul. Look, that guy has kept his mouth shut about the biggest crimes. I don't give that guy any credit. But it's certainly possible that he went in with a hangnail to the doctor, and the doctor said, "Oh my goodness, Rand, you're corona positive." And anything is possible. That guy is almost certainly controlled and compromised, and probably got told, "Listen, clown, you're going to be corona positive and you're going to like it." And he said, "Yes, whatever you say." So they can do whatever they want, George. You can go into the doctor with a common cold. You got the coronavirus. You can go in with you just broke your water and your pregnancy. You got the coronavirus. Anything that they want. It's very similar to the AIDS scenario. Mislabel you as having the target disease, then give you the poison that they claim is the cure, and you're done. All right, man, I'm out of here. Great job, Eric. Always a pleasure to stream with you, brother, and hope to have you settled and do some more with you soon.
Oh, thanks for coming today, guys. Great stream. Always fantastic information. I'll keep you both posted with what's going on with me with my moving situation, but it should be probably a week and a half until I'm fully settled into the new place. Right now, I'm back and forth from my where I'm at now. It's like my apartment in St. Catharines is pretty much empty. I'm living at my parents' place, and then I'm moving things into the new house. But that should be about a week and a half, and then I'll be good to go with the 3 streams a week again.
Good. Take your time, stay safe, settle in, and eager to get you back as soon as possible, bro.
Oh yes, and hopefully by the time you get settled into your new place, Eric, we should have this whole virus situation wrapped up.
Right about Easter.
So I think this is going to be like an ongoing. This like we've said on the stream, this is like the new war on terror potentially. So this is going to be
just the beginning.
Unfortunately, this is just the beginning, I think. But we'll see. Maybe, like we said, with the Pope trying to pray away the virus, maybe they're gonna, maybe they'll say it's a miracle that the Pope is, praying away the. Like they'll attribute the numbers going down directly to the Pope's prayers. Maybe that's.
Oh, sure, you bet. They probably will put an end to the coronavirus, but this will just set the precedent for future viral hoaxes and plandemics, the way the mass shootings have been set over and over and over again. They got a finely oiled machine for false flags. They can pull whatever direction they want.
Well, like Pompeo said, that we're in a live exercise right now. So
that's right. Great find. Great catch. All right, guys. God bless. Have a great weekend. Hope to hear from you all soon. Take care.
Take care, Johnny. And so I hope that Jorge has a fresh supply of good rosary beads.
Yeah. Sterilized ones. Take care.
Yes.
So I'm sure that the miracle of the rosary will be attributed to the virus going away for sure. But great show today, George, and I'll see you on the next one. God bless.
Okay. Well, take care.